This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Catawba County Economic Development Corporation annual virtual meeting. And I want to thank you all for joining us today via this format and hope that by the summer of 2022, we can all be together again in person. We understand that there may have been some technical issues, but I want to assure everyone that this full meeting will be taped and we will provide a link for that tape in the future in case you'd like to go back and review. I'm Garrett Henshaw, president of Catawba Valley Community College and the chair of the Catawba County Economic Development Corporation. You know, our team, we continue to focus on the need for workforce and economic development in Catawba County. And the EDC mission statement has driven us to partner with our county and its municipalities to create over $7 billion in new and existing business development and thousands of jobs in Catawba County since its creation. We also want to recognize our sister organizations operating under the EDC umbrella, and that is also the annual meeting for the Catawba County Industrial Facilities and Pollution Control Authority, the Industrial Revenue Bond Authority, and the Catawba County Property Development Corporation, the PDC. So we will now also convene those two annual meetings into this one. The Catawba County EDC also understands that the success of Catawba County depends on partnership with organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, Catawba Valley Community College, with programs such as K64 and the Manufacturing Solutions Center, and Duke Energy, the Electric Cities, Electric Co-ops, Piedmont Natural Gas, Norfolk Southern Railroad, and I can't list all of them. So there's many, many more, but thank you to all of our partners who lean in when it's needed to help us continue the development of our region. The leadership of our elected officials for our state, Catawba County, all of our municipalities, and the outstanding staff members that work with each organization for the benefit of the greater good makes it possible for us to succeed even in difficult times. Thank you to our federal and state elected officials and the amazing staff for working together to create opportunities that will continue to build our future. We also have a committee of 100. These are individual organizations that say economic development is important and they're willing to roll their sleeves up and help us with investments and other things. I'd like to recognize the work of our EDC board members for their consistent and unwavering support of economic development in Catawba County. But the board could do nothing without the best economic development team in the state. Under the leadership of Scott Millar and his team members, Julie Pruitt, Nathan Hewitt, Tim Bolick, and Donna Laster. And I wanted to recognize that group today because they work tirelessly every day for the benefit of our area. The board is also welcoming two new members to our board this year, and that is Mr. Bob Mullinax, appointed by the city of Newton, and it's also Mr. Frank Young, appointed by the city of Hickory. We welcome our new board members and look forward to bringing you into the fold. But we also want to thank two other members that will be leaving us this year for their 6 years of service, both of them, and that's Stephen Shuford and Lance Sellers. Stephen and Lance, thank you guys for being there, for helping us through difficult times, but providing that vision and leadership that we all need. The following graphic demonstrates the efforts of all of our partners with our 2021 yearly report, the 10-year report, and then the EDC lifetime report. And all I can say when I look at these numbers is wow. And thanks to each and every one of you for making these successes a reality here in Catawba County. With all of this success we've experienced, we also realize that we must continue to leverage the assets of Catawba County and maximize a balance that ensures that our economy and its workforce remains vibrant for the future. We also realize that one of the most critical factors facing our economic health is labor and the ability to fill positions for new and existing employers. The EDC board has been very focused on the labor situation in Catawba County and around our region. At a recent board meeting, Stephen Shuford stated that no longer could human resources be considered just as a company function, but that it needs to be a part of every company's strategic plan. It has to be at the forefront of defining an employer's culture and creating new and innovative ways to connect with talent and build value-added relationships that create sustainability for a company's future. As a result of this focus for all of us, we've asked our guest speaker to address this exact topic today and we have identified a national firm that realizes that labor is not a COVID thing, not a political thing, nor a federal benefits thing. It is not just a Catawba County problem, it's a national dilemma that is bigger and more systemic than we recognize. Our hope is to understand the situation better and then use our partnership magic that we have here in Catawba County to identify and create successful solutions. So at this time, I would like to ask Nathan Hetrick to introduce EMSI and our guest speaker. Nathan.
Thank you, Dr. Henshaw. Good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to feature Mr. Ron Hetrick this afternoon. I think hopefully some of you have had the chance to read the report you see up ahead of you, but just a little bit of background on Ron and why we asked him to be here today. Ron brings nearly 30 years of labor force economic experience to Emsi. If you've never heard of Emsi, which is now actually called Emsi Burning Glass after a recent merger, Emsi provides labor market data and economic data analytics to organizations just like the EDC. So we are actually a subscriber to their product on an annual basis. So in his current role at Emsi, he's a director of staffing, product, and data. And he oversees the development of Emsi's staffing specific data products, as well as listening to customers' needs and writing on speaking on labor issues just like today that are affecting his clients. Prior to working for Emsi, Ron had a 20-year career with Allegis Group, overseeing market analytics and data science teams developing data analytic products, as well as having an 8-year stint with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, overseeing the monthly employment estimates, in particular the manufacturing employment, which is so critical in this community. And you often see Ron quoted in numerous national publications like the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, for his insights into the labor market. How we came connected with Ron was because of this ebook you see on top of the screen, The Demographic Drought, and how the approaching sansdemic, not a pandemic, a sansdemic, will transform the labor market for the rest of our lives. So this 40-page ebook, which hopefully you all have had a chance to at least skim, if not read in thorough detail, co-authored by Ron and a number of Emsi researchers, stands as one of the best and clearest analysis I or much of the EDC team has ever come across as far as labor trends affecting our community and our nation. We would highly recommend its hard-hitting yet understandable report, and just ready to be floored. It's a lot of hard-hitting information, but it's a reality that's coming our way, and you should also feel invigorated by the constant challenge it's going to promote for your community, our community, and your business. With that, I'm now going to switch the controls over to Ron, and hopefully no technical boo-boos, but we're really honored to have Ron Hetrick here today and hear some great analysis and insight from him. All right, Ron, I'm going to switch to your baby. Wait.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Do you all hear me now? Great. I'm going to share this real quick. Sorry. All right. Is this all visible? Let me know. Then Nathan, is this visible to you?
Yep, you're good. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much for your time today. This is quite a huge deck, but I'm not going to go over every slide. It's basically a master deck. I've been asked to speak in a number of places on this particular topic, and I really appreciate the chance to speak here today because for years ago, I started seeing that these things were coming into place, and I started speaking about it more and more, almost with a desperation, and I felt like just such a small voice, but Emsi was very gracious, and last year I had written an article about the difficulty in finding workers and what was going on, and they came back to me and they said, well, what else you got up your sleeve? And I said, well, I've had something I wanted to write for a long time about the way that boomers are kind of going through society, and this was the backdrop for this article. So they sent some writers alongside of me to help make sure we could get this thing out the door, and what came through is a potentially very depressing article. It's very compelling, and I think what my goals are today are, definitely want to tell you what's happening and really to point out that where we are is not an accident. It's not something that should have surprised us, even though I think it is a bit. And more than anything, just to let you all know that it's not going away. So, and just to explain why. So, like I said, there's a lot here, but I'm going to be going pretty quick. So if questions come up and everything, I'm not going to address anything until after I'm done. You're going to be holding on for the ride as it is. So I just, ask you your patience and just persistence and try to stay with me on some things. So really the way that you have to look at the situation that we're in is it's really important that you understand what was happening in the world, especially in the U.S., but a lot of places all over the world before COVID even became a thing. And then what happened during COVID that really kind of accelerated something that we were already seeing. And we talk about that in the article, that we had some fundamentals in play, but when COVID came into play, it took something that we were thinking was going to happen over a number of years, and it almost made it happen overnight, which was a little bit scarier than we had anticipated. And then briefly, I'm going to talk about where we're heading. I think it's going to become very obvious in the early part of this where we're heading. I have some slides at the end about what you can do. My hope is that I can certainly get to those. They're just some brief talking points. I do get asked this question all the time. I was speaking with the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and they were like, well, what can we do? And I'm like, wow, I really wish I had some really cool things to tell you. But I'm an economist, so all we do is tell you bad news, and then we leave. But I'm going to do what I can to make sure it's a little bit better. So let's make sure we understand something fundamentally. And I think a lot of you employers already know this. But before, we've been heading down a path for a while. So first off, let's just set a backdrop of this boomer generation from 1946 to 64 really shaped our world. And they shaped our world in the most powerful way possible, which is, in the U.S. particularly, we essentially doubled our workforce because women entered at an incredible rate. And you can see those numbers here at the bottom. By 1996, we went from a 30% labor force participation rate for women to 60%. And it's not that just these people were coming into the labor force, but they were very educated. So they're generating money, they're generating skills. They are a highly qualified, massively expanding labor pool, also at a time that we were still having a lot of immigration. So employers got used to having a very significant menu to choose items from, and we became very selective in our job descriptions. We had so many people who had acquired so many skills, and it really changed the way that we approach labor. There's a problem with that, and that is starting in around 2002, the very first wave of the boomers started to hit retirement age. And so you can see this, it's almost like a tidal wave. This is the number of people who were 55 plus. And you can see that around 2022, this is what the baby boomers look like as they're rolling through the economy right now into retirement ages. So as they start retiring, this is right before COVID. And I want you to keep this in mind because you're going to be like, oh, is he talking about now? No, wait till we get to now. But this was right before COVID even struck. We had 7 million job openings, but we only had about 2 people for every open job. And half of those people weren't even able to work. They were out of the labor force. They'd like to have a job, but they couldn't work. So at the time, we really did not have enough people to fill our jobs. And that was giving us the lowest unemployment rate we had ever had in a non-wartime situation. So if you look at that date, that is February of 2020, we had hit the lowest unemployment rate that we had ever had. So before COVID ever became a thing, we were already getting into a crisis mode, and people weren't feeling it. We used the gross analogy of the kind of the boiled frog thing where it was happening so slowly that people didn't know it was there. And then that would change pretty quickly. I was talking about record job openings because we have this low unemployment rate. A lot of people were quitting their jobs. These are all things they're common things now. In fact, last month we had the highest quit rate in history. So you're going to see these things constantly coming back to us and where we're at. Another thing that we were seeing, and we're going to really hammer this today, is that right before COVID struck, there was increasingly a large number of people who were just out of work. They didn't, out of the work that wanted a job that was going down, discouraged workers disappearing. A lot of the people were just out of work because they weren't really interested in working. Another development that was happening was in 2016, millennials took over the boomers as the largest population. And you would go, oh, okay, well, that's good, right? Because they're coming in and they're going to help replace this boomer population that we're losing. But the problem with that was, and particularly for men, as the millennials entered in, they were much less interested in working. So we see the labor force participation rate, especially, this is prime age men, so 25 to 54. And if you all think about your companies and what you employ, you'll probably think, well, that's kind of a target for a lot of us out here is this kind of age group. Well, their participation in the labor force started to plunge. And then, you know what, so just continue to hold on to this as a backdrop. So their labor force participation rate is plunging. The ones who are working are increasingly switching out of full-time work to go to part-time work. So this graph that you're looking at is the amount of people who are working part-time because they want to work part-time. And so this number was skyrocketing while people who are working part-time because that's the only job they could find had cut in half. And in one group that really was embracing this was, once again, prime age men. So you see these are those two lines that we see again, kind of ignore the COVID blip there at the end. But men, especially prime age men, were increasingly going part-time. So we have a lower labor force participation rate, and then the men in particular who were in it were increasingly not looking to work full-time. This is a very difficult thing to read, and because of time, I'm not going to go greatly in depth to it. I just want you to think of one line here, just as an example of this. If you go down on that left side and find manufacturing, this is where workers, as a percentage of 100, when they changed jobs, this is shortly before COVID struck, what industry they went from and to. So manufacturing loses about 5% of its people to construction. I want you to go all the way to the right side of that graph, and you'll see that a lot of manufacturing's losses of employees, about a third, were actually going to retail. So just an illustration of, we see people walking away from 40-hour-a-week jobs to retail. Now, if you think about what you've been hearing in the news lately about Walmart paying, you know, $15 or more an hour, and you think about Amazon $15 to $18 an hour, then you realize that people can do these jobs, they can do these part-time jobs and make a pretty good chunk of change when a lot of assembly jobs, a lot of general labor jobs were paying in the $10 to $12 an hour range. Maybe if you were lucky, $14, $15, if they were somewhat skilled trades, $18 to $20. There's the ability to appease people with money was starting to wane because the bottom end was already coming up into the space. So just want to make sure that we have this backdrop: lower labor force participation, retiring boomers, and then this propensity to not really want to be fully engaged in the labor force. So with that in mind, we get to where we are now. Sorry. So currently, I actually subtitled this slide. It's not just a perfect storm. It's a hurricane, tornado, and earthquake rolled into one. So here we sit right now with, instead of 7 million job postings, we now have 9.2 million job openings. So significantly more jobs open now than we had previously. So one of the reasons why, you know, this is going on is this problem. So if you look, when COVID first struck, we had a lot of people drop out of the labor force for various reasons. The problem is they didn't come back. So only part of those people came back. This is the labor force participation rate. So we see this initial bump up, and then for the past year, it hasn't moved. And we're going to talk about this in a little greater detail in just a second. But it's something that's really important to understand, that we are not getting the people back who dropped out when this happened. And if we look at, you know, this is that kind of expanded view, the amount of people unemployed, that kind of went down and then it stopped. The amount of people out of the labor forces, I was talking about labor force participation, but this is on the right side, the literal number of people who are out of the labor force. We saw a huge jump up, and then it started to come down, and we were all going, okay, this is going to come down. And then it stopped, and for a year, it hasn't moved, and that is particularly troubling. But we're going to tell you why we're seeing that. Hold on, sorry, get my arrows here. Sorry, there we go. So one of the biggest problems that we're running into right now is, I think, a bit of a lack of understanding about what is the U.S. now. There's a book that was written years ago called Factfulness by Hans Rosling, where he talks about people's views of the world are stuck in basically the 1960s and 1970s. So when he asks people questions about world illiteracy or childbirth rates in the world, he gets answers consistent with the way things were back in 1960 or 1970, certainly not the way things are now. And I think there's also a misunderstanding by a lot of people about what makes up the U.S. right now. So if we look at the actual volumes of labor in the U.S., 9.1 million people have less than a high school diploma. 35 million have a high school degree, but nothing more. They're high school graduates. But if you look on the right side, we've got 96 million people that at least have an associate's degree. This is actually a significant problem for where we are currently, because 6 million of the 9.2 million open jobs that we have right now do not require a college degree. These are manufacturing, these are retail, these are restaurants. These 6 million, we don't have those people. So that left side, we're showing you the 6 million of the open jobs, but we only have 3.39 million unemployed people that do not have at least an associate's degree in college. So people, this should start to already make you go, whoa. And then you go, well, how can we fill these? Is it high school students? I mean, well, traditionally we would do immigration, because the high schoolers are really kind of, there's only 600,000 of them that are unemployed, certainly not going to help us get our number. And even those that are unemployed are really kind of going through college or in some state of that. So it's not a labor force that we can really take advantage of. So we would naturally say, well, then let's talk about immigration. There's a significant problem here. For years, immigration has been heading down. Now, for reasons that we all know, immigration disappeared completely off the face of the earth, especially towards the last half of last year, as a number of economies shut down the ability to go from country to country while they were, making attempts to try to get the pandemic under control in their own country. But this is a significant impact. We lost all of those people, and you don't just make up for it. You don't just have, a bubble and then they all come back at an exponential number. We were already trending down. And in a second, I'm going to tell you why I don't believe that this is the answer going forward. So where we're at right now is a 5-factor reason. I'm going to shoot through them. And so you can see it's temporary shutdowns. I've emphasized temporary, the CARES Act payments, and then just this idea of wealth, which I'm going to talk about. I talk about it in a lot greater detail in the article. The massive retirements that we've experienced, people adapting to life, being out of the labor force, and then lastly, opioids, which if you're in certain industries, I'm sure you felt that impact. A lot of the companies and stuff that I talked to have felt it. So initially, let's cover the first one. When we lost all the jobs that we lost, the 21 million that we lost, 80% of people who lost their jobs said, look, I'm just on a temporary furlough. Now, eventually, some of those people who were on temporary furlough lost their jobs completely, but a vast majority of people did return to work right away, or, and this is important, they believed that they would be returning to work soon enough that they were like, look, I'm in no urgency. I'm going to wait for my job to come back. I'm doing all right. So this is our first thing. This was a temporary thing. This is not like a normal recession. In a normal recession, only 10% of people believe that their layoff is temporary. So in this one, it was 80%, not 10%. Where we're at right now is we have between regular unemployment, which you see at the top, 3.2 million. We also have this pandemic unemployment assistance, and then it's pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. And so we still have, as of right now, 13.6 million people collecting some form of this unemployment assistance. This is in light of the fact that we actually have 9.2 million open jobs. So there is a factor of there are people who have not re-engaged that financially it would not make sense. They do have these forms of compensation that are coming to them. And if you look at that time chart, you basically have unemployment, which, depending on the state runs, anywhere from 26 weeks or around that thing. And then you have PUA and PEUC, which can go for another 39 weeks after that. Now, the PUA and the PEUC are supposed to stop on September 6th. Now, there's some talk of expanding that. I don't believe that will come through based on where we're at. But just so people understand, this is a significant amount of time that people have been able to be compensated. So what does that look like when you do that? And this is what we have here. So that money that we generated went basically went straight to people. So it went into our economy. So it was $4 trillion extra dollars. So you may notice there's a slight change in this graph on the right side. And that was all of this money coming in to the economy. And when it comes into the economy, it wasn't going out in general, it was going into people's hands. The way we can see that is the median household earnings in the U.S. have skyrocketed to record levels, especially in the past year, as we went, literally from the mid-50s or so to 78,000, basically over a 2-year period, but in particular last year, really skyrocketed. So the intention of the government was to put money into the economy. They did, and it went out and now it's got into people's hands. So it allows people certainly to make decisions on their own terms. The other thing I talked about was earlier I was saying, look, boomers we know are retiring. They were retiring at a rate of around 10,000 a day. There was one significant problem, and that is when the whole COVID thing hit. One element that we talked about in the paper was boomer couples, because they were a dual couple earning income for about 40, 50 years, were more financially able to retire at a younger age than any generation that had ever existed. A lot of them were teetering on the edge of retirement. Well, they all decided last year to go ahead and do that. So we lost a significant number of people that were probably going to retire over the next couple of years. They all decided to retire at one time. This is a really, really important data point to grab hold of, because these people, this excess, this surplus, they're not coming back. So as we start to do the math about, well, what can we expect and who's going to come back, we have to subtract about 1.5 million, or at least 1 million people that we thought were going to be in the labor force that are no longer looking to be in that labor force. So if this was a survey that was just done, it was done in May, of 9.3 million people who lost their job initially, and then in some stated form. So they're either collecting unemployment or they're out of the labor force. And so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce asked these people, what are your intentions? And if you do this, it's a pretty troubling stat. So of the 9.3 million, 1.2 million said they're never coming back. And I believe a lot of that might be the boomers that retired, but it's just an interesting thing to say. Of these people that were previously employed, 1.2 million said we're never coming back. 1.6 million said we're not coming back this year. We may come back eventually. Then you have this 3.5 million that said we're going to come back, but I'm not really looking for a job. Only 3 million of that 9.3 million said they are actively looking for a job. So as we keep going, wait, why did those numbers get stuck? Ron, you said that things plunged, the labor force participation rates going down, and then it started to go up, and then it stopped. You said the amount of unemployed started to come down, but then it stopped. The amount of people out of the labor force started to improve, and it stopped. This is why it stopped. It's the fact that in this particular case, 2 out of 3 people either are not going to come back or really aren't actively interested in coming back. So most of these people were like, look, I haven't even seen a job. I haven't really applied for something. But it was just a very sobering piece of information. In and of itself, this survey, who knows how much value you could put into it. But I think when you see the numbers all getting stuck, it all kind of makes sense. The last part of that is overdoses hit a record number last year. This number just came out. We have about 860,000 men, prime-age men, that are out of the labor force right now due to opioid addiction. And then deaths obviously had an absolutely massive increase last year from overdoses. So we talk about that. So it's everything is kind of set up. Then we have this then we have the current state, all of these things coming together. So that's what I was talking about. It's a tornado, it's a hurricane, it's an earthquake. Everything that could go wrong last year did go wrong. But all of these things did exist. We already had opioid addiction deaths. We already had boomers that were retiring. We already had people increasingly dropping out of the labor force. Unfortunately, what COVID did is, like we keep saying in the article, it slammed that accelerator pedal into the ground. And so everything that we were seeing happened way too quickly for what we were able to feel. Hence why we have 9.2 million job openings right now. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but just to say, one of the things we really hammer in that paper is that it's not expecting that things will get better is absolutely not on the table. Our birth rates have been way too low for far too long, so we are not at replacement level. So we're never going to see anything like we had with the boomers later. When we look at from 2003 to 2017, the amount of births that were occurring in the country, there were only two states in 2017 that had a birth rate that was at least at replacement level, and it was only at replacement level. The rest of the states in the U.S. were far, far below it. And something we've noticed in the Northeast in particular is birth rates have absolutely plunged. So you can see that various parts of the country are going to feel this a little bit more than others, but you're talking about 50 states that are probably going to try to use the people that came from two much less populated states in South Dakota and Utah. So this is the problem that we've been having since the 70s, are we just aren't having children like we used to have. So it's something that we expect this to increasingly occur. If you think, well, what happened last year? You don't want to know. It was the lowest birth rate in the history of the United States. Every state really did poorly last year. To an extent, we understand why this happened. But what's so funny is, I know there's going to be people on this call who say, but I thought everybody was home together. Didn't we expect the birth rate to increase? And the answer is actually it shot the exact opposite. I think a lot of people were just afraid of going to the hospital. What if there were complications? So this is what happened last year. So when you look at these kind of things in perspective, our population growth from 2010 to 2020 was similar to the Great Depression, the era after the Great Depression, where people were very afraid to have children for fear they wouldn't even be able to feed them. So this is something that is an absolutely devastating thing, because these percentage points represent millions and millions of people. And I'll jump down to this. The working population of most counties, as you can see, has shrunk to 2021. When we look at the population of under 15-year-olds, those numbers are down significantly from 2011 to 2021 as well in most parts of the country. Now, if you live in Utah, which nobody on this call does, then that would help you to understand why they won't feel it as much. But just you can see kind of how that's working. I don't know if we have any colleges on here, but we talk about it in the paper. When you have less children, then you don't need as many schools. Enrollment in higher ed is expected to continue to plunge. In fact, it should fall off the face of the earth pretty soon. This chart here, even though these lines look so small, these differences are significant, because this is actually the population of people in the country based on years. So the 22 years old number at the top is much bigger than the less than 1 year old or the 1 year olds, which means every year the problem's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. Then we have this problem of most of our boomers, or a lot of our population, the Generation X and such, will increasingly get older, as well as millennials, and they're going to be over 60 with very little population to actually support them. So that's something I don't even want to approach. It's not my area of specialty, but just to know that we will turn radically upside down in the cone. It's a cone that they use to show the age groups population by age groups. We will be flipping pretty dramatically soon enough. Now, the last bit I wanted to talk about was, a lot of people go, well, hey, as soon as we can get everything reopened, we can get our borders reopened, and immigration is going to be great. I don't have a lot of slides on this, just to say the unemployment rates in countries that we have traditionally received people from have been coming down fairly dramatically. There's always going to be countries that are in crisis. No one wants to deny that. However, the fertility rates around the globe have been plunging, and they've been plunging for the past decade or two. So increasingly, the countries that we have received people from are starting to say, look, we can't lose these people. We have to have these people. India right now is in a labor crisis, especially when it comes to like IT people. China is in a significant labor crisis. Their fertility rate, because of the one-child policy, has plunged so dramatically that they are in a crisis right now trying to financially incentivize people to have children. The only problem is there's not a lot of women in China, so you can't really have children when you don't have women. So this is something that is not just affecting us, it's affecting countries across the globe. Japan is in crisis. They're upside down. Korea is closing schools left and right. Their birth rate has been 0.7. Japan's 0.9. Italy is around that level. So countries all over the world are dying for people that they never had. There's just, those babies were never born. So basically what I have here is, this is the real quick last thing. Look, you could raise wages. I don't recommend it, because you get in a gameday war. And you know what? You start down that path, you're going to be raising wages for forever. Figure out other methods. And one of those is offer non-wage incentives. You know, give people a seat at the table, give them more power in speaking up in your organization. Simplify your job requirements, cast the widest net possible. Just get people through the door. Go back and look at your job requirements and say, is there anything in here that someone would look at and go, you know what, I just don't think I'm qualified for this job. You look at each item and go, we don't need that. That would be nice to have, or we can train that. And that last thing I have on the right side, get phenomenal at training people. It's something we used to do as a society. We completely got away with because of the boomers and the fact that they were so highly skilled. Now we have to get incredibly good at it again. You should be so good at onboarding somebody. You should brag about how fast you can get somebody up to speed in your environment. That way you can cast a wide net, get as many people in there as possible, and then train them up. And then the rest of these things is just make sure in the long run, go back and do a worker study, hire an industrial engineer, do whatever you need to do. Look at the way work's getting done and say, do we have to have that many people? It may hurt us in the short run, but what if we did this a little differently? What if we offloaded this? How can we look at labor and make this a boardroom conversation rather than a conversation that occurs between HR and some hiring managers? This conversation needs to happen at the boardroom level. You've got to think strategically about, we've got to become less reliant. This guy, Ron Hetrick, just got done saying that the people aren't there to come back. So what is our strategy for handling that if that is in fact true? Even if I don't believe him, I at least want to make sure that I have a strategy to deal with that. So that's what I had. I shot through it as fast as I possibly could. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. And I know, okay, let me see this question here. I saw, any thoughts on the cause behind the consistently failing birth rate? Yes, actually, it's very easy. The falling birth rate in Rosling's book, Factfulness, what he talks about is there is a direct correlation between a percentage of women who receive college degrees or higher and lower birth rates. And it's just a focus issue. And so as the U.S. population continued to grow its educational side with females, it's natural that the birth rate declines. Everywhere you go in the world, right now they're observing it in Africa, as they're bringing education levels up in those countries, the birth rates have fallen from like 7 children down to like 2, down to 3 or down to 2. And it's just a matter of, these people get these degrees and they're trying to contribute, and children make it much more difficult to engage in the workforce. So it is something that they have consistently observed as the primary correlation to why we see lower birth rates. Any other questions?
Ron,
and I apologize for speaking so fast.
No, that was great. I mean, I don't know if you can call it great in the sense of it's a truth sandwich to eat for lunch, but yeah. I think it's the reason you're here today is to cover so much of this so quickly and do such a great job. I did receive a bunch of questions, and I'll kind of relay those on to you now.
Okay.
One of the folks on here today asked if, within your general knowledge at this point, are you aware of any communities, that have kind of heeded this call, or even companies that are kind of, taking those steps of what you're doing, making it as seamless as a transition to get in the door, and then taking them, onboarding them to this point where they're upgrading their skills when they may not have the necessary skills. So kind of the company side, yeah. But also the communities, are some of those taking off and trying to do their best to go against this kind of huge trend?
Yeah, so the person who asked that, you're quite astute. So this was yesterday. I talked to a Wall Street Journal reporter for about an hour, and she just at the end goes, "Do you know anybody who is doing something, really cool here?" And my answer to that is, I wrote this article out of a burning realization that people felt pain, but I think a lot of people thought the pain wasn't going to last forever, and that these things were eventually going to go away. And whether they thought, well, maybe it's just the checks, or maybe it's just this or just that. And I wrote this to say, we've got to wake up like this. We saw this coming back in 2010. And unfortunately, I think we're at a point, I cannot believe how many HR people I'm talking to right now who are like, look, my company leaders just think I'm getting way worse at doing my job. Because, they're like, where is everybody? We put these postings out a long time ago. Why aren't you getting anybody? And I was like, wow, so we're still in the education phase. I can't believe how discouraging that is. Like, fortunately, this article has gotten a lot of traction, and I really do appreciate the media coverage that we've gotten on it. But I do believe right now we're too early for that. I will tell you that there are anecdotal pieces of evidence. There's been some companies that have partnered with the prison systems, for example, which I'm a massive fan of that. The states will absolutely insure certain things. They will stand beside companies and helping them to train people up. They will take on a certain amount of risk. There are certain things around that people have done that I consider to be progressive. You saw that Amazon stopped doing their background screenings for marijuana. Riskier things, but you're getting into a riskier environment. As far as the training aspect, what I'm not seeing yet are the companies saying, you know, we can get somebody up to speed and we're really good at this. The other thing that I can't stress this enough, for everybody on this call, you got into your company, whether you own it, whether you are a senior person in it, and you love that company, you founded that company with a passion, and you look at it and you go, we're adding a service to society. We do something really valuable here. For so many years, the ability to convey that passion to people was lost. And if you look at workers now, and this sounds so ridiculous, and I think a lot of people are like, that's just more of this hippie writing and everything. But I'm telling you, people are absolutely motivated, younger people in particular, that they're doing something amazing. And so, you know, I talked to a manufacturing company recently, and I was like, I know you treat metal, but what is it that it goes into? And he goes, oh man, it goes into these products and that product. I'm like, do your workers know that? Do they understand the same passion that hey, when you do this goes into these cars and it's amazing. We'll take you up. You got to see this plant sometime. You have to do a better job of selling ourselves now. The worker is the buyer, and the buyer has so many options to buy. And I know there's people, I've talked to a company that made toilets and they were like, what can we do? And I was like, hey, there's no value there. I'm like, there's so many things, but it doesn't happen without intention. And so, like I said, I think we're early on, but think of things intentionally. Like, what are we going to do? What cool things can we come up with? And then try them on people and see if they work. But right now, I think the evidence isn't out there.
That's a pretty good segue to a couple questions we got around. What, you know, is there some data or, you know, analysis that looks at this, whatever generation you want to call them, Y, Z, you know, let's say you're 35 and under crowd, are there things that are more appealing to them? It seemed like from that one graphic, it was not so much pay, but a part-time flexibility.
Yeah.
And the folks on here references, they've had people request down promotion or, you know, demotion on purpose just because of less hours worked. Has there been any, you know, work into or do you all see it in your work where, what's driving those younger demographics, those groups in the workforce?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure that slide became a centerpiece of it was a centerpiece of the article. I wrote the whole middle section of that article. We talk about men disengaging due to even the video game thing. So it's not in this deck. If you haven't read the article, you're never going to believe it. But video games are a big reason why men aren't working full-time jobs. And I know that you'd be like, that's crazy, but it's actually factual. They've researched it and found that to be true. There is, because of options. So I want to circle back to something. I talk about this a lot in the article. I focused on it a little bit here. In the article, we talk about transference of wealth. Money is not an issue for the generations coming through now. They like to say, well, these people have such a huge college debt burden and, you know, homes are so expensive. Well, in a relative speaking terms, things haven't changed dramatically enough to say, well, if college debt is so significant, then why aren't you working? Because the only way you're going to pay that off is to go out and get a great job. So the math doesn't add up. If you're saying that these things are the reason people, you know, aren't doing certain things, well, then they actually prove the point more that they should be striving harder to get a great job and to be making a lot of money. However, money is so not a motivation. What is a motivation is exactly, boy, we talk about COVID slamming down the accelerator pedal, did it again. It sent everybody home. And now people who are like, man, I can do my laundry at home when I'm working from home, and I could never do that. I was always trying to cram it in. I think I want to stay in this kind of situation. So I want to work at home at least part of the time during the week or anything like that. And I'm like, well, you work in a warehouse, so you're not really going to do that. Well, how do I get that back? Because I really like this, you know, idea of kind of being at home during the week. And it's something that companies don't want to hear. But I hope that one thing you got out of this deck was everything I just talked about has never happened ever. We've never gone through a population inversion. We are in an inversion. So everything that you're seeing is going to keep compounding. And we talk about that in the article, that by 2050, these issues become significantly more dramatic. You know, the labor force is going to shrink away. Now, part of that's okay because there will be less people buying products, so you won't need to make as many products. But it's just such an odd concept for everybody to think about, wait a minute, but we always keep growing. The stock market always keeps growing. Well, no, it won't, because you won't need to make as much GDP. You know, companies won't need to keep making more product to satisfy the needs of consumers. So these are all aspects that the world's changing. So one of the things that I do recommend is, you know, when you talk about flexible schedules, we can talk about it all we want. But when you go to engage people, try an experiment. Put 2 postings out. Do the same job and do one as a flexible schedule and do one as full-time and see what kind of hits you get. Interview those people. See what their situations are in life. See if these are things that they can overcome, things like childcare, things like other issues that they have, and see if maybe that strategy could work by, you know, doing, I know that we talked about shift sharing years ago, but you have to get more creative than going, we're going to wait this thing out. It's like, no, you're not. Like I said, before COVID even struck, these things were really bad. COVID just made it worse. And we're just only going to go back to bad. Actually, right now, it looks like we're going to go back to even worse than bad. But yeah, I don't know that that helps at all, but I would just say really, really entertain the idea of how can you work with people on a scheduling side to hopefully, you know, ease the load for them.
Awesome. I think I've got one more question. We do have, you know, thankfully we've got some forward-thinking companies, and hopefully, you know, across the board, they're trying new things every day. I see it when I'm interacting with them, but I'm sure we could go further. We had a recent company that received a kind of a national award for a great place to work certification, DAE system, small family-owned company, but a fairly hard process to go through and to receive. So we're on that path, but it sounds like we need to speed that up and scale it up significantly. Last question would be, you know, we're outside of the Charlotte. We're kind of the Charlotte's Northwest. We're roughly about an hour from uptown Charlotte. We've got some of that growth, you know, coming out to this side of the ring around it. Do you see this issue magnified worse in kind of rural suburban communities? Are we insulated by being closer to a growing hub like a Charlotte?
Okay, certainly one of the things that we had in there was the birth rates. There's another graph that I don't show you, which is talking about population migration. So the Northeast, and hopefully no one here is like up there, the Northeast is dying. And this is something that's been happening for a long time. COVID really caused a significant shift of people. New York experienced a very significant population decline. So there's certain parts of the country that you do have people leaving those parts of the country. I mean, this is something that we also were seeing for years, thanks to the invention of air conditioning. You know, states like I live in Florida have really exploded because, you know, people are like, hey, I can get, you know, summer year round. So there is a bit that you are going to benefit from that. And I don't want to minimize this. Targeting is completely legal here. Like if you want to go into these areas that you know are not doing well, you know, if you want to go into places like the Northeast, or if you want to say, look, we can bring you down to Charlotte, you know, hopefully you have the housing. That's the biggest problem that people have right now. Because we have no workers, we can't build homes. That's a big significant problem that we're running into as well. But I think there's an aspect where you go in and you look at places that you're like, hey, they have a higher cost of living than us here. These are our target people to go after as a population, because they could actually maybe sell their home in Vermont and come down to an area like this and do well for themselves. You know, it's a much easier sell than going from Des Moines to like Washington, D.C. You know, so I think those things are also, that's intentional behavior. It's studying the way the markets work, studying the migration flows. Where are people moving from? This is all tracked, by the way. Census Bureau tracks, you know, you can actually click on a county and see where the most people have come from other parts of the country to that particular county. I don't have that link on me right now, but there are ways that you can do that. And I think that it is certainly beneficial. Is this going to affect rural areas more? Actually, this is the funny part. Rural areas have been dying for years as people, you know, went to the cities. Now what you have are all these people working remote who are trying to move out of the cities to rural areas. So does that help you if you're like, well, I run a warehouse and these people aren't coming out here to join my warehouse? Well, maybe they're not, but maybe their kids would. So, you know, there's things around that it doesn't hurt to be in an area that's growing. I don't think this is one area is going to benefit more than others. I would just say that there are parts of the country that I am a lot more pessimistic on than other parts.
Well, Ron, you've been so gracious with your time and doing such a wonderful job presenting really difficult information, but at the same time, it's so good to hear it. It'd rather be on the kind of the proactive end as opposed to the reactive as much as we can. So we very much appreciate you being here, giving up your time and expertise. And I guess if we could, we won't do it now, but I'm sure people would be clapping for you and giving you a standing ovation if we were in person right now. So just take that as the little gift at the end.
I think I probably drove everybody to drink on this call, so hopefully I didn't depress everybody to death. But it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much, Ron. And with that, Dr. Henshaw, if you'd like to close it out, or anyone else.
Oh, thank you so much, Ron. And I think you can hear the passion, but there's an urgency about it. And this is a big truth sandwich. And I want everybody who has joined us today to know that agencies, organizations, systems are leaning in on this topic here in Catawba County, trying to find solutions. And one of the big things that we have focused on is trying to work with our employers on teaching them how to fish differently. This is a challenging cultural change for a lot of people, but I think we can do it if we all partner together to address this issue going forward. And it's not a one show that's going to fix it. It's not a point the finger towards an organization and hope that this doesn't continue to impact us. All of us will be impacted by this as we go forward. So the urgency behind us working together, partnering, leaning in, rolling up our sleeves and going to work is critical. And Ron, just thank you for the amazing research that you've done and the insight that you've given us, because I think it does help us to get focused into some key areas that we can definitely make a difference into. I'd like to ask Scott Millar. Scott, do you have any closing comments for us? Scott must be having some technical difficulties, so
sorry about that. I was doing my best.
Go ahead, Scott.
Ron, first off, thank you. That was a very difficult topic. I've told people that was probably the most effective communication piece on the topic that I've seen, and so we wanted you to be the presenter for this, and I hope it's communicated our issues. Of course, like you said, it's not just local, it's not just COVID, it's not just federal benefits. And the more we bring this to I liked your discussion regarding, we're still in the education and information phase, but we're trying to proceed beyond that as a community. And there are agencies, there are parties, there are entities, and there are employers on this call, and all of us have different responsibilities. And I hope that what this does is that it gets us past that information phase and helps this group to understand that we as a community and we as employers and we as agencies and institutions have responsibilities. And I know our board, the EDC board, has done nothing but talk about this topic for the last 3 months. And so maybe longer than that, but nothing in our board meetings except this for 3 months. And so we recognize that it's an issue and that we need to move beyond it. So while it's not going to be easy or quick or short-lived, I think that we at least can get past that education part now. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And again, I want to thank everyone for attending today's meeting, and hopefully you'll be able to get some information back. And please look at the full document, because it really does give in-depth analysis of what's going on in our country and around the world. And we have partnered with EMSI through the educational sector for many years, and we're currently doing a statewide study for our community college system to find out where our return on investment is with specific programs and how can we work more effectively. So there's things that all of us can do. And so what we hope that you'll do is take the information that you learned today, see the relevance to your organization, your role, and then start making a difference. And conversation is always the starter, but doing something about it is even more critical now than ever. So thank you for attending our annual meeting, and we'll consider ourselves adjourned.
Thank you.